Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to Brazil is Not for Beginners. I'm your host, Isaac Matzner, and while we're taking some time to record new episodes, we decided to put together a couple of very special episodes highlighting some of our best moments from our past conversations. We'll hear directly from the experts I've interviewed, sharing their observations about Brazil, its cultural habits, and the nuances of living and doing business here. So to get started, let's hear some insights from Roberto Borsic, Gustavo Camargo, Ruben Guerrero, Amanda Martins, and Andrew Endicott on what makes Brazil so unique.
When we speak of Brazil, we're speaking of a country with more than 213 million inhabitants. Over 70% of the people here in the country have internet access, especially through mobile phones. And this digital connectivity within this immense addressable market makes Brazil a very interesting and ripe country for companies that maybe sell consumer goods, that maybe deal with tech or with media or other sectors.
Just to put that in perspective, what does it mean? And when you add the social class distribution, etc., Brazil, only the A and B class, is roughly the size of Canada. So the A and B classes, on average, the income per capita is equivalent to the average income per capita of Canada, and the number of families and individuals is the size of Canada. So inside Brazil, there is one full Canada plus class C, D, and E. It's not a poor country on average. It's not a rich country on average as well, but it's very unequal. And this inequality creates much more situations and or opportunities than most people think.
Brazil has really grown in the last few years in terms of just becoming an international destination for entrepreneurs and builders. And there is so much that needs to be built here. And the upside of building in Brazil is limitless.
Our ecosystem here in Brazil is packed with fintechs, B2B SaaS fintech, multiple markets such as climate tech, mobility, agriculture tech. There are a lot of opportunities for those sort of companies because there's like big markets here in Brazil that are unfortunately underserved.
In so many ways, Brazil is so much bigger than you think. In almost every sense of the word. Geographically, it's huge. There are all kinds of crazy relations that, Eastern Brazil is closer to Africa than it is to Western Brazil, and Northern Brazil is closer to Canada than it is to Southern Brazil. All kinds of ridiculous dimensions of the geography of Brazil. The culture is huge. There's a tremendous amount of diversity. Everybody's speaking the same language, but there's a lot of very different things going on. But most importantly for this, I think the economy is huge. You've got very large industries, very diverse industries that there's not, I think Brazil does a lot of things very well, and it's a great place to invest for a lot of reasons.
While Brazil is indeed a country full of opportunities, many of our guests emphasize the importance of local knowledge, long-term commitment, and relationship building for finding success. Here's what Moises Asiag, Seba Dominguez, Deb Mioranza, and again Gustavo Camargo had to say about this.
Some people simply have this big misconception that they can run things in Brazil from whatever they are, and it's going to work. It's not going to work. So I would say just understand the country a little bit. Please come here, live here for just 3 months. Just walk around, go to a football game, wherever, and then you go back to your country. You can run Brazil from there. Don't worry. But you need to get a flavor of what this is.
I think the most important one was building real relationships. For me, it was pretty hard the first 2 years until I understood how to deal with the people in Sao Paulo, with the people in Brazil, not only like short-term businesses or negotiations. I try to build long-term relationships based on expertise. That for me was crucial. My recommendation, if you want to move to Brazil, you want to establish in Brazil, do it flexible, like come here, connect with people that are involved in your expertise, understand how is the market, build connections, go back home, come back again, go for carnival, understand what is carnival, spend time with people at the beach, and then make the decision. I think opportunities will come if you are well connected.
I 100% agree with everything that Seba just said. I think the cultural nuances play a huge role here. Like he said, Brazil business is all about building relationships.
the communication is definitely more indirect and there's a flexible approach to time too. It's also like a challenge when you see a country that less than 10% of the population doesn't speak English fluent, right? So we can't deny that's a contrast with the US where the communication is direct, the time is of the essence, and understand all this difference for sure is a key of success here.
I think I would be the 10th people to say Brazil is not for amateurs, but I don't think any country and any investor is for amateurs. So I don't think that specific part is specific to Brazil, but I think Brazil is specific in its own way. There are very successful international investors in the country that have been investors not for one vintage, but over the long run. So that's the thing. So taking a commitment in the long run is probably the single variable that separates successful versus unsuccessful international investors in the region. There are a lot of very smart people and great ideas in the cemetery of investors in Brazil.
Navigating these cultural intricacies can be tricky, especially for professionals who do not speak the language or are not aware of how Brazil's cultural habits influence day-to-day business operations. Amanda Martins, Deborah Maria, and Guta Tolmasking add their observations on this as well.
And even you go out of the business world, like you talk to doctors here and they don't speak English, right? And even like the business world, what I see is like many times people say they speak English and then we start a meeting and they don't, They're really struggling. And during that meeting, I think this is something overlooked. And I see that the language is just making that business to not happen. And just like suggest people hire a translator, like it still works.
When you talk about business, I can tell you if they don't have any special discussion about the company's local culture, this is a shock because here in Brazil, things are handled in a different way. You do have the coffee time where it's not about the coffee, it's about getting to know your team, getting to know people inside the office, building relationships. So, this is one important thing.
So when you are in a meeting in Brazil, you need to like have this small talk for at least 3 minutes on, oh, where are you at? And where in the world are you? And oh, today's very warm weather, right? Do you have kids? And all these things that feel very invasive to an American. It's actually being polite in Brazil.
And when it comes to communication between business partners, clients, and employees, things can get even more complicated as Brazilians are known to be very indirect in their messaging. Fek Kaloi summarized it best when she said that in Brazil, a yes is a maybe and a maybe is a no. And if you've been listening to us for a while, you probably already know that this is a topic that comes up again and again on this podcast. So let's hear more about the nuances in Brazilian communication from Fé, Gustavo Camargo, Débora Maria, Cadu Azevedo, and Jiangan Li, who also add their insights on this topic.
This is very important. In Brazil, a yes is a maybe and a maybe is a no. So when someone finds out about that, their life changes because when they hear yes, they're like, oh, this person is all in. But in 2 days, the person will come back and will say, yeah, I thought a little bit better and maybe. And when they say maybe, it's because they want to say no.
So let's say you are talking about a deadline and you say, okay, can you do that by Monday? More likely, if someone doesn't believe they will be able to meet the deadline, they would say, oh, we'll give it a try. They will not say no. They would avoid the no because the no sounds rude and aggressive. Someone from an Anglo-Saxon culture might hear that as it's possible or it's likely. He didn't say no, so he will do it. And so the problem is as much about the individual not saying no as the person listening and guessing that not saying no is a yes, right? What's missing there is not the communication, is the context to understand that you should make a follow-up question.
When you talk about feedback, communication, Brazil is not a direct country. For you to give a hard feedback, you need to be careful about the words that you're going to say. So depending on the country that you come from, you are more like, okay, straight to the point, that'd be an issue. And especially when you are in a managerial position, you need to be careful with that.
Brazilians take things very personally. This is an interesting question because when you see a response from someone that's very straight to the point, often people think that, no, they're probably mad at us. And sometimes it's not. It's just the way people communicate.
I still remember back in 2014 when I was working for Easy Taxi, we hired a East European, I will not name which country, to manage that team of 10 people. And I think at the end of like 2 months, more than half of 10 people wanted to resign because they said our new boss is too rude. rude consistently. And I think then the management did a little bit of investigation. They realized that, I mean, he's not being rude. He's just being Eastern European, right? I mean, straight to the point, looking a bit cold, looking a bit depressed. And I think this is supremely important because, I mean, how to sort of build and maintain this personal rapport, even within a team, right? Even sort of within a structure where there's a hierarchy. I think that's kind of important for people in Brazil working with I don't know, bosses, colleagues for other countries, especially from Asia, is that this is not something that people are used to. So maybe it's something that you should consider when your boss sounds very rude to you. Sometimes it's not because he's bad. It's not the style that he's used to.
When it comes to building a team or launching products in a market like Brazil, taking these characteristics into account are an important factor for foreign professionals looking to succeed in the country. Kadu, Deb, and Amanda shared their knowledge and a couple of strategic tips for businesses looking to enter Brazil, as well as some of its complexities and contradictions.
The international players that understand that tropicalization, as we say in Brazil, of business models and products is required. And they allow local teams to drive the implementation, but yet they supervise the process. These players, they tend to be much more successful. There is a mixture between, supervising and allowing local people that know the rules of the land and know how things operate to basically help with the implementation.
And I think it's all about understanding and respecting the local culture, being adaptable and finding the right balance between local knowledge and global vision. You cannot think that whatever works outside of Brazil will work here and have this as a top down. You definitely want a team in Brazil that reflects Brazil multifaceted society and foster creativity, innovation, collaboration. Those are definitely like key characteristics of the employees here in Brazil. They really like to collaborate. They love programs where they can develop their skills. So they seek companies that do foster an environment where they can learn more, they can find professional growth.
Consumer companies also look to Brazil with good eyes. I think that I see is like how lower the competition is in Brazil versus the US versus Israel. The ecosystem here still offers less competition in comparison to other countries. Brazil is a market of tighter margins, but bigger scale. And I think this is something that a lot of companies struggle. And many of the companies that I saw that gave up on Brazil, their mistake was specifically on pricing, understanding where to positioning their brand and how to price for Brazilians and to give up some margin and bets on volume. Like you need to understand what's the pricing that is going to make you scale and then Brazilian scale back. I think the first thing is talking to consumers so you can understand what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. What do you need to localize? What's going to be the airport versus the potential results of this country, right? So you start to landing the business. Another tip that I give is just like start light. I see a lot of companies jumping in and putting a lot of money in the operation. The thing is, my suggestion is always outsource as much as you can. Sales may not come quickly and you need to expand your runway, right? It's like a startup. And also when you start, like you have more flexibility to adjust what needed to be adjusted. So save resources for adjustments you might need to do. And we're also talking about like a country that has really good payment infrastructure. Like you cannot sell a product here in Brazil without offering Pix. Over 70% of Brazilians pay using instant payment Pix.
What it's interesting is that you go like on a padaria to buy your bread in the morning, and the guy is at the counter and he's like, "Do you want to pay using Pix?" You're like, "Sure," which is very tech, right? R$ 3 in Pix. And then when you look at him, he's writing down on a notebook what he just purchased. So that's like the type of, I would say, situations that we face here in Brazil is like the really tech savvy versus something that's like very simple and very traditional and I would say like old, right?
Another common thread shared by our guests is how Brazilians love to outsmart the system. They even have a popular expression that encapsulates this characteristic called jeitinho brasileiro. Julia De Luca helps explain.
And this is very particular. Brazil is the country of the jeitinho, right? Everything has a way in. And if you know that person, if you know how the game is being played, etc., etc. So what I always say to foreign investors is that you have to look beyond the pitch deck and beyond your diligence of the business. Do actual reference check on the person, on the business model, if it actually works, because Brazil has several particularities that when you sit in the US, you cannot see, right?
So this I would say is the first thing. And it's also valid for a person that is founding a company. Again, it's very challenging to hire, very challenging to fight bureaucracy if you don't know anyone. So try to surround yourself with locals because that's how you're going to figure out and get your way around everything.
All of this is to say that Brazil may not be as easygoing as it may seem at first. And a lot of this jeitinho culture has to do with Brazil's bureaucracy, where you might need a really creative way to accomplish certain goals. But there's also an element of being extra careful with Brazilian laws and financial regulations to avoid really big problems later on. Many of our guests spoke about Brazil's bureaucracy. Let's hear what insights they had to share.
I mean, you need to have this talent. You need to be a pro to operate in Brazil because there's this regulation and it's a bit of a mess and things don't go by the book always. So it's like you need to have experience to figure things out and understand how things work.
Everything seems to have like another little step that you didn't consider. Everything will cost more, will take more time, and will bring more problems, you know?
Being able to open up a bank account for your company or for yourself through an app, it's an innovation, right? Back then, you'd had to go and sit at a branch and hope that the bank manager could figure it out in 2 to 3 hours. But chances are that you would have to come back to the branch because you were missing some document.
If you look at Brazil carefully, we are paper people. We demand people produce paper, even to prove that they exist. That's half of Brazil, the bureaucracy. And the other half is business wise. Normally, here we work very fast. We adopt very quickly the new concepts and management. We are very into that thing. But those two together, they don't form kind of an animal that people would understand. They have to understand that we are half bureaucracy and half dynamism.
Brazil is not an intuitive country. Like we are a diverse country full of contradictions. So we are party people, and at the same times we are religious. We are extremely creative, but we have little education. We are urban, but 80% of our exports come from commodities. The population is tech savvy, but there's still a lot of bureaucracy involved in creating tech in Brazil.
That's the big problem, I think. No, the bureaucracy in Brazil, and I do understand its reasons, obviously, because you want to protect somehow consumers and protect the market. But bureaucracy is a killer for new initiatives. It increases a lot the cost for you, not only to start a new business, but to start a new operation and even to run an existing operation. And often, this bureaucracy disregard the basic concepts of law and economics, and you have to spend a lot of money on things that are totally like transaction cost. It doesn't create any benefit. This money would be much more well invested in actually development of products, availability of products, pricing. But that's a burden that we still carry. But I do think that technology will solve a lot of the villains that we still face. But when you take other regulated markets in Brazil, it's pretty much the same, like huge potential, but with structural challenge that need to be faced.
And so one important thing to say, really good to hire those local expertise. Big advice that I gave is don't save money with lawyers, accountants, like those are good investment. And at this point, there are like plenty of B2B startups that catering this sort of problem in Brazil. But like on the positive side, hacking is part of Brazilian culture. We have something called jeitinho brasileiro, which is like finding a way. We also mean outsmarting the system and being creative. So I find hacking easier in Brazil.
And it's exactly this hacking culture that makes Brazil so exciting and offers so much opportunity. Let's hear from our guests on what makes them excited about the future of Brazil.
I always say that Brazil is super exciting because when you land here, you start to experience friction that maybe you take for granted in your home country. But if you have the right lens on, that friction translates to opportunity.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Creativity thrives within constraints. There's kind of dynamism. I think that that's maybe a good word here. We talk about American dynamism. Well, I think the Brazilian dynamism is the thing. You have a willingness and a desire to kind of tear down the old, put up the new, and put it up better than it was.
Brazil is a major food exporter, and 84% of the agricultural fields in Brazil already use tech solutions. So anyone that works with agriculture tech worldwide is looking at Brazil. Brazil is one of the cleanest energy countries with 80% of total energy coming from hydro, wind, and solar. So Brazil is also good too for climate tax. Crypto, Brazil is among the top 10 most attractive markets for crypto globally, together with Argentina as well. And to São Paulo and Rio, Brazil has 17 cities with over 1 million inhabitants. So smart city solutions also look a lot to Brazil and Latin America. Then I go to not that obvious answer, such as hardware companies. If you look at Brazilian startups, most of them are software companies. So there's a big gap for hardware companies in here.
If you are creating services and products for middle class, you had 100 million people somewhere that we can call middle class for most financial services products, for most retail products, e-commerce, technology, everything that is behind the wheels. So serving other companies, you're serving a market of 200 million people. Given this magnitude, any relevant, any big company in consumer goods, it can be in food, it can be technology, it can be in appliances, etc., that considers themselves as a global company, either they have a Brazil business or they have a Brazil entry strategy somewhere in their strategic priorities. And the success stories are the ones that identify those needs and those opportunities and monitor and execute it over time, committed to creating a business in the long term, both as an investor as well as a corporation that's exposed to the region.
What I can say about Brazil is that we are on the edge of creativity here. So when you look at the main marketing professionals, most of them are Latin or Brazilians. So we have the best professionals here. And if you go look at marketing departments around the world, you would find a lot of Brazilians, expats. And Brazilians are very connected and very social. So everything related to community and content and social media, Brazilians are very engaged. So marketing is going through a shift. And I think we have the talent in Brazil to discuss it and to propose something to the world about how marketing should be done. I think Americans are great in frameworks and organizing thoughts. But here we are great at connecting with people. So that's a debate. And I think we should have a voice. And I would love to project this conversation from Brazil to the world because I think we can not solve, but figure out how marketing should be in the future. I think Brazil needs to be part of this conversation because we are a powerhouse in terms of marketing.
Brazil is living today a very interesting moment for the business of football. We are dealing with what I call the first wave of investors, the most adventurous ones, the guys that, realize there's an opportunity. They bought some of our clubs. We are still discovering what's going on. And this first wave came in search of the big opportunities, the easiest opportunities they can see. Now we're starting to deal with the second wave, which are, more seasoned investors, guys that understand better the business. They are used to have other clubs in the world. They're not coming here to test the waters. They know what to do, etc. So that's where we are. And our team, we are definitely focused on helping clubs and helping any agent of this big market to change this mindset, just break that barrier and move towards the next level of this game. And myself being a fan of both, understanding businesses and football, playing and seeing, watching football, it's a very important moment for myself and my team because it's a kind of a unique opportunity. Many, many factors are acting at the same time on the same environment. And I'm sure that we'll jump from being one of the peripheral markets to being one of the main markets in football.
I still believe a lot in fintech. So I think that financial services, we are just like scratching the surface of how we can innovate. I think that like with blockchain and with everything that's going to happen and is happening, there's a lot of opportunity.
I think innovation feels deeper than the United States. And so everything relating to fintech, everything relating to the innovation economy here is extraordinarily deep. And that's something that every time I come back, the moment you land and you start talking to people, I'm kind of blown away by it. The degree of innovation happening here with Pix, with Drex, with open banking, with all the innovations coming out of the Brazilian central bank that are truly incredible. And one other thing that's very notable about Brazil is there's a desire to create regulatory clarity that does not exist in the United States.
We prefer lack of clarity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The United States is much more inclined to kind of have this very different form of development of regulation that almost mirrors kind of how common law was created, where it's through enforcement. that you
Right, like you're not going to know where the edge is until you fall off, and then you'll be unhappy. But the rest of us will know where the edge is. Yeah.
exactly. And so in Brazil, there's a much greater willingness to just go out and say what the rules are, and then say you've got to comply with them. We're not going to tolerate non-compliance, and they have a willingness to push the big players, the incumbents, to do it.
But you also know exactly where the line is.
In Brazil, you have clarity, and so the capital goes to these new places where you, like Drex, there's going to be a lot of capital going in to find cool new things to do with it. There's a lot of energy and effort going into it, and I think that's exciting. I also think the opportunity is huge, so the rewards are potentially very large. You can do really well if you do it right in Brazil, and so I think there's just a high bar. It's not a place for amateurs.
I think that last phrase from my friend Andrew Endicott really summarizes it all and encapsulates perfectly why Brazil is not for beginners. What about you? What are your insights about Brazil? We would love to hear from you, so please share your stories and experiences with us, either via email or by leaving a comment on whichever platform you're listening on. I hope you've enjoyed this special episode, highlighting some of the best moments and quotes from Season 1. To wrap up, I'll leave you with our guests' favorite Brazilian expressions. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, abraço.
There's an expression that I love by our Minister of Economy, and he said, in Brazil, even the past is unsure.
Brazilians have the saying, which I love, jeitinho, the little way. There's always a jeitinho to get things done.
Vamos marcar. Like, let's set a date. And I say all the time, and I really mean it. And that's like sometimes how I feel, but sometimes it's the way of ending the conversation.
There's a famous phrase here in Brazil that says, if you leave Brazil for 10 days, when you come back, everything has changed. If you leave Brazil for 10 years, then you come back, nothing has changed.
Brazil is not for beginners is like the best sentence to start off because it's actually what Brazil is. It's be smart. Watch out, because if you're not really paying attention, someone might be doing something behind your back that you don't even know, and at the end you're not going to even notice, and that's what it means that Brazil is not for amateurs.
An expression that I love and I think that translates a lot of the Brazilian personality is "Tamo junto, galera," which means we are together in this.
Quebrar o gelo. This is when you meet someone, having some chit-chat. It may be a positive thing, and this will help you create a better connection. Please do break the ice.
To me, one that I love is quem vê close não vê corre, which in English you can translate that it was an overnight success that took 5 years.
I like bora, vamos lá, bora. Bora is let's go, let's move on.
Thanks again for joining us. This podcast was hosted by me, Isaac Matzner. It was produced and edited by Maria Filmes. You can find more episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, as well as on our Substack page. We do love feedback, so please feel free to reach out to us on social media or via email at Brazil4beginners@gmail.com.